At my brother's graduation party, my chair had a sign that said, "The failure." My mom snorted and said, "Well, you never did much." So I raised my glass and said, "Here's to being the only one who pays the bills." She scoffed until I pulled out the deed to her house and said one final thing before leaving. I'm 32, and I can't remember a time when my family didn't make me feel like I was falling short. Maybe I was always a little different from the rest of them. I didn't follow the same path my parents laid out. I didn't go to the same prestigious college that Thomas, my younger brother, did. I wasn't on track for some high-paying job with a title that made my mom and dad proud. To them, I was just the disappointment. It's funny because I always thought I could make peace with it. For years, I tried to do what I could to not rock the boat, tried to show up to the big events, even when I knew it'd make me feel small. But last weekend, something snapped. It was my brother's graduation party, and for once, I felt like I couldn't sit quietly on the sidelines anymore. Let me backtrack a little. Growing up, Thomas was always the favorite. He was the charming, ambitious one who checked all the boxes. My parents never hid their preference for him. It wasn't that they outright told me I was a failure or anything like that, but their actions spoke louder than words. When they talked about his future, it was like they saw him as the culmination of all their hopes and dreams. Meanwhile, I just tried to get through life. I was never a troublemaker, but I wasn't exactly the golden child, either. I dropped out of college a year before graduating, and after that, I worked a few dead-end jobs before finally landing a position at a local design firm. It paid the bills, but I couldn't deny that it wasn't the career my parents expected for me. They didn't understand why I didn't push harder to find something more impressive. Every time I'd bring up my job, I could tell they were polite about it, but they didn't really see it as enough. So when I showed up to Thomas's graduation party, I already knew the dynamic. It was going to be all about him. And I guess I had resigned myself to being the background character once again. But I wasn't prepared for what happened once I walked into that room. The party was at my parents' house, the same place they'd always lived. It was a big, old place, but to be honest, it had started feeling more like a burden than a blessing. My dad had gotten into some financial trouble a few years ago, nothing catastrophic, but enough to leave them struggling a little. They had this facade of wealth, but I knew better. I didn't think about it much anymore. It wasn't my problem, right? When I walked in, the place was packed. Family, friends, people I'd never seen before. And there, right in the middle of it all, was Thomas, beaming with pride. He looked exactly like the son my parents always dreamed of. My mom was hovering around him, making sure everyone knew how proud she was of her boy. My dad was off talking to someone about Thomas's future, probably already planning out his next steps, where Thomas would go next, what job he'd land, who would be impressed. I tried to find my seat. But when I pulled out the chair at the table, I noticed something. A sign was taped to the back of it, and it read, "The failure." At first, I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like I hadn't been the target of passive-aggressive comments before. My mom always had a way of slipping little remarks into conversations, remarks that were thinly veiled criticisms about my choices in life. But this felt different. It was so blatant, so public. I could feel the heat rise in my chest. My mom saw the sign too. She didn't even try to hide her amusement. She walked past me, snorted a little, and without missing a beat, she said, "Well, you never did much, did you?" I felt my throat tighten. Part of me wanted to snap back, to say something that would cut through the tension, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and sat down. I could hear the chatter around me, the conversations about Thomas's future, his accomplishments, the people who had come to congratulate him. But I didn't feel part of any of it. I wasn't even angry, not at first. I was just tired. Tired of always being the one who had to watch from the sidelines. For a while, I just sat there, pretending like everything was fine. But it wasn't. It had been building up for years. The resentment, the hurt. I kept thinking about all the things I'd done for this family, all the things I'd quietly sacrificed for them. I'd helped out when they needed money, even though I wasn't in a place to do so. I'd been there when they called, every single time. And still, nothing was ever enough. Then, Something inside me snapped. I stood up, feeling all eyes on me as I raised my glass. I didn't plan it, but the words came out before I could stop them. "Here's to being the only one who actually pays the bills," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went silent. For a second, I thought I might have gone too far. But no one said anything. My mom scoffed, of course, but I saw the flicker of something in her eyes, a momentary flash of discomfort. It didn't last long, though. She quickly recovered, trying to brush it off like it didn't matter. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. And that's when I made my move. I didn't even look at anyone else in the room as I reached into my bag and pulled out a piece of paper. I knew exactly what I was holding, and I knew exactly what it would mean. It was the deed to her house. My mom froze. She didn't say anything at first. Neither did anyone else. I could hear the quiet hum of conversation around us, but it all felt distant. My heart was pounding in my ears. I held the deed in front of me for just a moment before I spoke again. "This house," I said quietly, "is mine now." There was a pause. The air seemed to thicken. My mom's face shifted, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to process what I was saying. I knew she didn't want to believe it, but I wasn't done. I couldn't be. Before I left, I turned around one last time, locking eyes with her. "You can thank me later," I said, and then I walked out. The tension in the house that night was thick, and as I stepped outside, I could feel the weight of what I had just done. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't scared. I wasn't even angry anymore. I felt numb, almost, but also a little relieved. I had said my piece, and for the first time in years, I wasn't hiding from them anymore. I wasn't going to let them make me feel like I didn't matter. I didn't stay long outside. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me hesitate. I made my way to my car, every step feeling heavier than the last. I could still hear the muffled voices from inside, some of them rising as they realized what had happened. I didn't know how long I'd been gone when my phone buzzed, but I didn't need to look at it. I already knew who it was. My mom. I let the phone ring out. A few minutes later, my dad called. Then Thomas. The texts came flooding in, but I kept my phone on silent. I wasn't ready to hear their excuses, their anger, their anything. They had always been so quick to brush me off or make me feel less than. Now it was their turn to sit in the discomfort. As I drove away from their house, I kept thinking about everything that had led up to that moment, the years of trying to make them proud, the endless cycle of disappointment, and the way they treated me like I was just a footnote in their picture-perfect family. But the thing that really stayed with me, the thing that kept me up that night, was the look on my mom's face when I pulled out that deed. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just froze. And that, somehow, was worse than anything. It was like she didn't even know who I was anymore. Like I wasn't her daughter. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the tension in that room again. The way Thomas had looked at me confused, yes, but also detached. I thought maybe he'd be the one to stand up for me, maybe say something. But no, he didn't. He just sat there, probably in shock, trying to process what was happening. He never did have a spine when it came to confronting my mom. He was always her favorite, always the one who got everything handed to him on a silver platter. The next day, I got a call from my mom. She wasn't screaming or anything, she never really screamed, not in a way that felt like raw emotion. It was always controlled, manipulative. Her voice was tight, the calm before the storm. "You think you can just waltz in here and take my house, then walk out like nothing happened," she said. "You've crossed a line this time, and you'll regret it." I felt the anger rise in me, but I kept my voice steady. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into that cycle of guilt and manipulation. "I didn't take your house. I just made sure it's in the right hands now," I said. "You've had plenty of chances to take care of things, but you never did." She scoffed, her voice dripping with that same disdain she always had when I didn't meet her expectations. "You're just like your father, always looking for the easy way out. You think this will change anything?" I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I should even try to explain. I'd learned long ago that trying to reason with her was like talking to a wall. She never listened. She just twisted things until they fit her narrative. And the thing was, I wasn't even sure what she wanted from me anymore. She had everything she needed, at least on the surface. The call ended with her threatening legal action. She said I would pay for this, but the words were empty. They had always been empty. It was her way of trying to scare me into submission, of making me feel like I was the one who was wrong. I didn't respond right away. But that night, I got another call, this one from Thomas. I braced myself for what he was going to say. He was always the mediator in our family, the one who tried to keep the peace, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice when he spoke. He wasn't sure if he should defend me or take his mother's side. "Listen, I don't know what's going on with you, but Mom's really upset," he said. "She doesn't get why you do something like this. She said you're trying to ruin everything she's worked for." I didn't even know where to start. It was the same old argument. She'd worked for it? She'd worked for what, exactly? The house that my dad had been too proud to sell when they needed the money? The house that had become a symbol of their financial mismanagement? "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Thomas," I said, keeping my tone level. "I'm just tired of pretending that everything is fine. It's time for a change." He was quiet for a long time, and I could hear the hesitation in his silence. It wasn't the silence of someone who was just listening. It was the silence of someone who didn't know where their loyalties lay. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer, almost apologetic. "Look, I get that you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle it," he said. "Mom's still our mom. You can't just take everything away from her." I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. "It's not about taking things from her, Thomas. It's about her never taking responsibility for anything. It's about how she's always treated me like I'm invisible, like I don't matter." He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched on, and I could almost hear him trying to figure out what to say next. "You've always been the strong one," he finally said. "But I don't know if you're seeing things clearly. Maybe it's not as bad as you think." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. He was telling me, in his own way, that I wasn't strong enough to see what was really going on, that I was being emotional, irrational. He was siding with her without even realizing it. And that was the moment I knew they weren't going to change. My mom wasn't going to change. Thomas wasn't going to change. They were always going to make me feel like I was the problem. And no matter how much I tried to fix things, they'd always make me feel small. That night, after hanging up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and relief. I had just burned a bridge, and I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, but I couldn't go back. There was no going back. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. At first, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest, like I could finally breathe without the constant pressure of my family's expectations looming over me. But as the silence dragged on, I started to realize that the quiet wasn't relief, it was just the calm before the storm. My phone barely stopped buzzing. My mom called, texted, and even emailed me, all with the same thing: threats, guilt trips, and an endless stream of manipulative messages designed to make me feel like the villain. My dad, of course, stayed quiet. I didn't expect him to say anything, not after all these years. He never had the courage to confront anything head-on, especially when it came to my mom. So he just stayed out of it. But Thomas, he was another story. He called more frequently than anyone else, but it wasn't to check on me. He'd call to ask if I was going to make peace with Mom, to see if I'd reconsider what I'd done. It was almost as if he didn't want to take a side, but I could tell he was more on her side than mine. He kept saying things like, "You can't do this to her. She's your mother." But he didn't understand. He never had to live with the weight of her criticism, the constant reminder that I was always second best. The thing about Thomas was that he always played the part of the good son. He was the one who made Mom feel like she was doing something right, like she was a good mother because of his achievements. He never questioned her actions, never pushed back. That was his role in the family. And it had always worked for him. He got the praise, the recognition, the love, while I got nothing. But now? Now, he had to deal with me. He didn't want to admit it, but the fact was, I had been pushed to my breaking point. I wasn't going to stand by and be the background character anymore. And as much as I hated to admit it, I could feel that old sense of resentment rising again, especially towards him. because I knew deep down he wasn't just neutral. He was complicit. He'd always been complicit in Mom's treatment of me. At first, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. I wasn't sure how far I should take this, how deep I should dig. I didn't want to destroy them, but I wanted to make them understand, really understand, how they'd treated me for all these years. I wanted them to feel the weight of what I'd carried, the years of sacrifice, the moments I'd swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. They owed me that. I didn't make any hasty decisions. I thought a lot about my next steps. I could already see how this was going to play out, their inevitable rage, the manipulative tactics my mom would employ to drag me back in. But I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of just walking away. No, I wanted to make her regret everything. I thought about the house, the deed. I hadn't shared the full story with anyone, not even Thomas. But here's the thing. My mom had been planning to sell the house for years. It had become more of a burden than a blessing, especially with all the financial problems they'd been facing. They'd put it off time and time again, but the truth was, they couldn't afford to keep it up much longer. My dad was hoping Thomas would step in, but Thomas was too focused on his own future to care about their problems. So here's what I decided. I would play the long game. I wasn't going to take the house away from them just yet. Instead, I would make them face the reality of their own situation. I would let them believe they still had control. I'd give them just enough rope to hang themselves. I knew my mom would want the house to stay in the family, even though she'd acted like it was a burden. It was a symbol of her success, her status. But the truth was, she wasn't going to be able to keep it much longer without serious financial help, and she didn't have any way of getting it. That's where I would come in. The first thing I did was call a few real estate agents. I wanted to get an idea of the house's true market value, its condition, what I could sell it for if I ever needed to. The numbers were eye-opening. The house had serious issues, structural problems, an outdated roof, plumbing that was practically falling apart. Sure, there was some value to the land, but the house itself was more of a burden than a blessing. I hadn't told them yet, but I was already putting together a plan, a way to show them the consequences of their actions. I wasn't going to do anything drastic, not yet, but I was going to make them understand what it felt like to lose control. One morning, about a week after the party, I got a call from my mom. She was furious, her voice trembling with rage. "Don't think for a second that you've won, because you haven't," she said, her tone sharp. "You think you can just take everything from me and walk away like nothing happened? You're wrong. I'll take you to court if I have to. I'll fight you for everything you have." Her threats were nothing new. I'd heard them 1,000 times before. But there was something different in her voice this time. It was a mix of fear and desperation. She knew I had leverage now. She knew that the house wasn't just a symbol of her success anymore. It was a ticking time bomb. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I let her rant for a few more minutes before I calmly told her, "I think you're going to need more than just threats this time, Mom. Maybe you should start thinking about your next move." I could almost hear her pulse racing on the other end of the line, but I hung up before she could say anything else. That afternoon, I paid a visit to the bank. I wanted to make sure the deed to the house was secure in my name, just in case she tried anything. I wasn't taking any chances. The bank confirmed that everything was in order, and I felt a strange sense of power wash over me. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I wanted to make them sweat. I wanted them to feel the pressure of knowing that everything they had was on the line. I didn't need to go to court. I didn't need to get lawyers involved. I just needed to let them stew in their own mess, let them realize that the life they'd built on the backs of their kids was falling apart. And when they did, that's when I'd finally make my move. But until then, I kept my cards close to my chest. I didn't need to rush. The longer I let them think they still had the upper hand, the sweeter my revenge would be when it finally came. The weeks that followed were filled with an eerie kind of tension. It wasn't immediate, but I could feel the storm brewing. My mom's calls and messages continued to pour in, but I learned to ignore them. My dad, as expected, stayed silent. He never really had the nerve to intervene when things got messy. But Thomas, he couldn't let it go. He called me one morning, his voice strained, almost pleading. "Can we just talk? Mom's not going to back down, and I don't know how much longer I can stay out of it," he said. "She's losing it. This isn't helping anyone." I wasn't surprised. He was scared. He had always been scared of confronting our mother, scared of the fallout. And now, that fear was creeping into everything else. "I'm not backing down either, Thomas," I told him, trying to keep my tone steady. "You need to realize what this is about. It's not just about the house, it's about the way she's treated me my whole life. She thinks she can push me around, make me feel like I'm nothing, but I'm done with it." I could hear the hesitation in his voice as he struggled to find the right words. He was too much like her in some ways, always trying to placate everyone, always trying to keep the peace, even when it meant sacrificing his own sense of self. "Look, I get that you're angry, but it's just tearing the family apart. You're going to lose everything, and for what?" he asked. "For what?" "For my peace of mind," I said. "I'm not going to keep sacrificing myself for people who don't care. Not anymore." The call ended with him promising to talk to Mom, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. He was never going to stand up to her. He was too wrapped up in her world. And as much as I hated to admit it, that just made him a part of the problem. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure kept building. My mom didn't stop with her threats. She called lawyers, tried to talk to the bank, even tried to convince Thomas to talk to me about settling. It was exhausting, honestly. I could see her desperation growing with every passing day, and that made me more determined than ever to finish what I had started. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let her make me feel small again. Then, one afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. It was from one of the law firms she had hired. The letter was full of the usual threats. She was going to fight me for the deed. She was going to take me to court. Blah, blah, blah. But buried in the fine print was a little detail I wasn't expecting. My mom had tried to put the house in both her and Thomas's name without telling me. They were trying to circumvent the deed I had in my possession, and if they had succeeded, I'd have been left with nothing. That was the moment I knew I had to end this, once and for all. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. The next day, I called a real estate lawyer and made sure everything was in place. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me out of what was rightfully mine. I also contacted a financial advisor to look at how I could stabilize my situation and make sure I could weather whatever storm they were going to bring. But I didn't stop there. I knew my mom's Achilles heel. I had watched her for years, seen how much she valued appearances, how much she wanted everyone to think she had it all together. And that was the key to bringing her down. I got in touch with a few people who knew about her financial troubles, old colleagues, business partners, people who had seen her do things she wasn't proud of. It wasn't about revenge, not directly. It was about letting the truth come to light. I didn't need to expose everything, but just enough for people to start questioning her credibility. And once I had everything lined up, I called my mom. She answered with a sharp, "What now?" as if she knew the worst was yet to come. "I'm done, Mom," I told her. "I've got everything I need. I'm not playing this game anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line, but I could feel her seething. "You think you can just take it all from me, don't you? I've worked my whole life for that house, for this family, and you're just going to tear it all down." I didn't let her guilt trip me this time. "You've worked your whole life for a facade, Mom, and I'm done living in it. The house is mine now. You'll have to find another way to survive." I could hear her trying to catch her breath, her anger bubbling to the surface. But I wasn't done. "I've already contacted a few people about your financial situation and the things you've tried to hide over the years. It's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. You've spent your whole life trying to control me, trying to control this family, but it's over now. This is your wake-up call." I hung up before she could say anything else, before she could try to turn the tables. And then, for the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief. I had finally taken control of my own life. They couldn't take that from me anymore. Within a few days, things started to spiral for my mom. The people I had contacted began to talk, and the truth about her financial mismanagement and the shady deals she had made started to spread. People who had once respected her began to back away, and her so-called perfect life started to unravel. The pressure was mounting, and I could see it in the way she spoke to Thomas. He was caught between his loyalty to her and his growing realization that things were far worse than he had been led to believe. But even then, my mom didn't back down. She still called, still sent messages, but now there was a different kind of urgency in her voice. She was scared, and that was all I needed. A few weeks later, I was sitting in my apartment when I got a call from Thomas. He didn't even wait for me to say hello before he started talking. "Mom's asking for a meeting," he said. "She wants to talk things through. She says she'll make it right if you'll just come back to the table." I almost laughed. "Make it right?" I repeated, incredulously. "Thomas, she's had every chance to make things right. She's the one who pushed me to this point." "You don't understand," he said, his voice strained. "She's not who you think she is anymore. Everything's falling apart. She needs you." I didn't respond right away. For a moment, I considered it. Maybe it would be easier to just end this, to go back to playing the dutiful daughter, to let her win like she always did. But then I thought about everything I had been through, the years of feeling invisible, the lies, the manipulations. "No, Thomas. I'm done," I said, my voice firm. "I've made my peace. This is over." And just like that, I walked away. I didn't need to fight anymore. I had already won. After that, my mom's situation only worsened. Without the house, without the support she'd always counted on from me and Thomas, she was forced to confront the reality of her financial troubles. It wasn't long before she was forced to sell the house and make some tough decisions. It was bittersweet, though. I didn't want to see her go through hardship, but at the same time, she needed to face the consequences of her actions. As for Thomas, he eventually came to realize how much he'd been manipulated by our mother. He began to see things from my perspective, though it took a while. He wasn't completely on my side, but the realization that Mom wasn't the infallible figure he'd always thought she was began to change their dynamic. For me, though, the whole ordeal was about taking back control. I didn't need her or anyone else to validate me anymore. I had my own life, my own future, and no amount of manipulation or guilt could take that away.